All right, everyone, good morning. Welcome, welcome. The voice you are hearing with the screen share is Ashley Kenny. I am the workshop coordinator here at NOFA Mass, and I am so thankful that you are all here to join us this morning. Again, my name is Ashley, and I live and farm on occupied Poohtuck land here in Woodbury, Connecticut. You are attending Pollinator or Weed, How to Identify and Manage Undesirable Herbaceous Plants. I'm here with Paul B. as my backup host, and today we are so pleased to present, I always do this with an Italian accent, Roberta DiBisceglie. So Roberta is not only a third-generation horticulturalist trained at New York Botanical Gardens School of Professional Horticulture, but she has also managed landscapes for over 20 years with her company, Columbine LLC. She is regarded as a mentor to many young aspiring landscape designers and horticulturists around New England, including myself. And so we are thrilled to have her here. Now, before we jump in, oops, trying to go to my next slide, wonderful. Before we jump in, I have a few details to review with you. The first being our native land acknowledgement. You'll see a link at the bottom of this slide, but Paul will be pasting it in the chat. We hope that you will visit this website, nativeland.ca, to learn more about the land that you live and farm on a little bit, and we are really just committed to act as allies to BIPOC communities, and as an organization we are trying to do our best to acknowledge those that farmed and lived here before us. Thank you, of course, to our generous winter conference sponsors. We really couldn't have done this without them. There we go. All right. Thank you for attending this workshop, and Roberta, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. That was a really great introduction. I really appreciate that introduction. I'm really glad to be here today for NOFA Mass. I am the founder of Columbine LLC, as Ashley mentioned, a fine landscape gardening and design firm. We're based in Norwalk, Connecticut, and Norwalk was originally named, it was originally named Norwalkie, which is derived from the same root word as Naramake, who was a great Native American chieftain. For many thousands of years, this land was inhabited by what I believe is the Algonquin tribe. There's a lot of conflicting information on the internet about the name of the tribe that actually originally inhabited this land, but I'm pretty sure it was the Algonquins. The indigenous people built their dwellings along the shoreline. We border what is now known as the Long Island Sound, and harvested fish and shellfish, and also planted corn. Now, most of the plants that we're going to talk about today, if not all of them, were probably not here at the time that the indigenous people inhabited this land. And so they were mostly introduced by Europeans. So you're in the workshop Weeds or Pollinators, how to identify and manage undesirable herbaceous plants. As Ashley mentioned before, there is a JPEG in the chat function. I encourage you to look at it. And I thought it would be fun afterwards to sort of test our knowledge. You won't be graded. It's just kind of for fun, but have a look at the JPEG or print it out or do whatever works for you, and we'll discuss the answers after the presentation. So I'd like to start by defining the word weed. There's a very famous definition by Thoreau that a lot of people have heard, which is basically the definition of a weed is a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered. Now, I would beg to differ with that, because most of the plants that we know as weeds were introduced here because their virtues had already been discovered. Many are escaped pot herbs, which is basically a plant that is prepared in a pot for cooking, such as spinach. Indeed, the lowly dandelion was introduced by early colonists because of its nutritional and medicinal value. Ooh, now this is interesting. I'm not advancing. Oh, now I'm advancing. That's good. So I was looking for more interesting quotes about plants in general, because we're going to be talking about herbaceous plants here today. And most of us know who Rachel Carson is. If you don't, she was an environmental scientist who wrote a seminal book called Silent Spring in the 1960s, which documented adverse effects of on the environment caused by indiscriminate use of pesticides. And I love this quote because it kind of sums up a lot of what the human condition attaches to the plant kingdom. And she says our attitude towards plants is a singularly narrow one. If we see any immediate utility in a plant, we foster it. If for any reason we find its presence undesirable or merely a matter of indifference, we may condemn it to destruction forthwith. Now, those are really strong words, and I would encourage all of us to open up to a more holistic view of the plant world and consider that all weeds are not negative. Indeed, let's not pass judgment on any plant. Depending upon the application, a plant may be desired or not. Until you know a plant, you can't decide whether or not it's useful in a particular space. It can be a food crop for people. It could be a food crop for pollinators. There are lots of very positive things about these plants that are commonly known as weeds. So the intention of the presentation is to help you learn ways to identify and manage what you may consider undesirable herbaceous plants. The plant kingdom is vast. I'm not attempting to cover every single herbaceous weed known to man that you and women that you may want to remove, and other people, to all people, that you may want to remove. I've gathered a list of commonly found weeds in the landscape. There are many more that I don't mention. This is an overview and an invitation to all of you to discover effective organic methods of control of plants that you don't want to have in your landscape. And I also want to mention that I come to this with a background as an ornamental horticulturist. I know a little bit about agriculture, but that's really not my area of expertise. So I'm going to give you some shared ideas from my experience as a fine landscape gardener. So once you ID a plant, you want to learn whether it is an annual, a perennial, or a biennial. It will help you decide how you want to control them. Timing is everything. So we're going to go over some very basic botany. Okay, well, I did have a slide that had the life cycle of a plant that started with newly emerging plants, which are tiny and often difficult to identify. And basically the life cycle of the plant starts off with a seed coming into the ground, and they're very tiny, they're newly emerging, they're difficult to identify. And then a plant starts to grow and it quickly produces stems, roots, and leaves, and then it produces seeds. Energy is directed towards producing flowers and seeds. Okay, so this is the plant life cycle that we were talking about earlier. And this is absolutely important for all of us to know, because an annual can complete its life cycle in a growing season. Propagates by seed. Annuals are very competitive. They succeed in unstable environments such as drought and soil disturbance. Some seeds can remain viable for many years. They're easiest to control at the seedling stage. A biennial will complete its life cycle in 2 growing seasons. They reproduce by seed. There's a rosette during the first year, and then flower and seed production during the second year. A perennial will live 2 or more years. It produces by seed or vegetatively. Root systems are extremely important to know when you want to identify plants and when you want to learn how to control them. So for example, most of us are familiar with stolons, which are creeping above ground stems. So white clover is an example of that. Strawberries are an example of that. Some plants have roots that are known as rhizomes, which are creeping below ground stems. So milkweed is an example of that, quackgrass as well. And then other plants have tubers, which are enlarged underground stems. And an obvious example of that would be a potato or yellow nutsedge, actually, which is a plant that we come in contact with quite a bit around here. And bulbs, underground stem covered by fleshy leaves, for example, a tulip. Because perennial weeds can propagate and spread underground, they can be very, very difficult to control. In most cases, removing the above ground vegetation will not stop the weed from spreading. So I want to give you some quick examples of how important it is to know your weeds. Corydalis incisa is a plant that I recently encountered, and I'm going to give you a quick case study about this. There's over 300 species of Corydalis, and many of them are ornamental. It's in the poppy family, and I use Corydalis lutea, for example, quite often in ornamental designs. When I researched this plant, I found a lot of things that I didn't want to know. It's an annual or a biennial. It's a spring ephemeral. That's not such a bad thing. It spreads by seed, but I then discovered it's invasive and it's a threat to native species. So it's typically found in floodplains along with another plant that I think many of us are familiar with called lesser celandine, which can also be very difficult to control or manage. Notice how I'm not saying eradicate, because in most conditions I've been a part of, I can't really speak to totally getting rid of plants that you don't want around. You can just basically manage them. Slide 5 over here, it's a great idea, I think, to use desirable plants as a weed smothering ground cover. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And so when I originally got into this garden, which you're going to see a little bit more of later, I saw this Corydalis and I'm like, wow, this is going to be great. I'm going to use this as a weed smothering ground cover. And then I found out it was a really bad weed. So the good news is that it responds very quickly to mechanical removal, and you just have to keep at it and be vigilant and diligent over several seasons. So I'm going to talk a little bit about and you can see this is my crew here, weeding very carefully amongst the Corydalis incisa in the very beginning. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about my preferred methods of control. If anyone has gone through the NOFA course for organic land care, which I have been through, and it's really a fantastic course. I would encourage you to take it if you haven't already. Page 46 of the Standards for Organic Land Care, there's a whole list of different things that you can look at. But I'm going to speak to the ones that I am most familiar with. So mechanical removal, I'm a huge fan of. Basically hand weeding repeatedly. This is a group of volunteers at Oyster Shell Park in Norwalk. And these are not, you can see on the right, this volunteer has got a root system of porcelain berry, which is not herbaceous, it's a woody plant, but I just thought it was a great example of how long root systems can extend. So again, this is mechanical removal. On the right, you can see Amy very delighted to have ripped out a Lespedeza that was outgrowing its space at my house in Norwalk. So weed smothering plants. You can cover the ground with desirable plants that outcompete weeds. This is an example of a woodland garden that was done in Chappaqua, New York by my friend and colleague, Joseph Kerwin. And you can see in the forefront, there are Carex. And it's a native Carex. I think it might be Appalachia, I'm not really sure. And then that beautiful blue is a woodland phlox, Phlox diverticata. This is another example of a woodland garden that we renovated in Wilton, Connecticut. You can see the crew is planting very densely plugs of various native plants in the front. And again, the hope is that this will smother the undesirable plants. You still have to stay on top of them. I mean, while the little plugs are establishing. There's no real easy answer to this. I don't have a slide for this next thing, but I spot spray with organic pesticides, for example, vinegar and salt, but I find that that works best for annuals, and it's best used in driveways and patios, patio crevices. And the reason for that is because, you know, the salt is going to be an issue and it's going to change the microbiology of the soil if you use it amongst other plants. And then we've got flamethrowers. So here Chandler is starting to get some annual plants. Again, this is a technique that you have to keep on top of, and I've found it to be most useful with annual plants. Sheet mulching, also known as lasagna mulching, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a very useful permaculture technique. You can see that we are putting it down here in a garden that has cut every weed known to man. You'll see more of this garden later. And here's Gavin, and he is doing the mulching part of lasagna mulching. You can see in this photo that the cardboard has been laid down and now we're mulching on top of it. And this is the finished product. We came in later and we put in even more plugs to smother it. I need to get a follow-up photo of this because that turned out really well, that rock outcrop thing. So I'm going to show you some short pieces about no-nos. I would highly recommend not to just yank, get the roots out. This person is yanking. I don't see any roots really there, much of anything. And you want to thoroughly dig out the root systems to the best of your ability. Then we've got weed whacking. I don't recommend this, although some weeds will respond to repeated weed whacking. Weeds like Canada thistle and stinging nettle. It will continually set them back so their root reserves are compromised, but grasses, no way. This is not going to work. You have to dig them out. They're amazingly tough. And I don't even think I need to talk about this video. I mean, don't spray pesticides and don't have your baby with you when you're doing it if you do, and don't not use protective gear. There's nothing good about what this young woman is doing here. So now we're going to talk about case study. This is a before picture of a garden that we renovated in New Rochelle. And you can see there's almost every invasive weed known to man. This used to be a very well-loved garden. You can see a buddleia or a buddleia bush on my left. I guess you're seeing it on the left also. There's little purple flowers there. But there's porcelain berry, there's curly dock, there's all sorts of crazy weeds here. And so I wanted to show you some before and after pictures. So this was the way the garden looked when we first got to the site. And you can see that little semicircular stone bench in the background. You can sort of use that as a landmark as we slide through these. So the first step was mechanical removal. That's what we do. Or digging up the weeds that we don't want. And you can see there's some peonies that we've hooped up there. And then this is, again, you can see that semicircular bed. That's the peonies. Actually, the peonies are not even in this picture. But this loose stone bed, this bed with the little stone path that we've got is basically where we were in the first slide. And you can see that we did a lot of mechanical removal, and then we heavily mulched. That was the next step. And then we came in with a lot of plants. We planted them very densely. You can see that there's some Nepeta in there. There's some iris. There's some penstemon. We relocated some of those peonies. There's some deutzia. A lot of deer on this site and a lot of rabbits. And you can see that in the background that there's, a lot of garlic mustard. This was in the fairly early spring, I believe. And this is how it looked after we planted it. This is probably in June at this point. And you can see that there's some weeds going on, but we're fighting a good fight to keep the undesirables out of this area. That's another view of the garden after it was planted. And here we are in, you can tell that this is much later because the Panicum virgatum, the ornamental grass is flowering. You can see some Caryopteris as well. And at this point we've been on top of the weeds like crazy. And on the left, you can see Alec is laying down more lasagna mulch. It's like, we've really been beating this thing down, but it's a couple of years into it now and it's looking really well. I need to do some follow-up photos. Oh, here we go again. For some reason, we don't want to move. There we go. Okay, so plant traits and the pollinators that they attract. This is an awesome chart, and I would encourage everybody to pay some mind to this. Plants have evolved to attract different types of pollinators. So you will see that, you know, for example, with butterflies, which, you know, everybody's really on the monarch train right now, which is a great thing. So for butterflies, you know, we know that colors that are bright, red, including red and purple, are very attractive to them. Nectar guides are present. Odor is faint but fresh. The nectar is ample, deeply hidden. The pollen is limited, and the flower shape, which is also, you know, a really important evolutionary trait, is a narrow tube with a spur with a wide landing pad. So the Lepidoptera can actually land on that. So I would encourage and invite everyone to find out a little bit more about morphology and how that relates to how the plant attracts pollinators. So now we're going to go through a list of plants that I have encountered, and you're going to find some of these on your little weed quiz. We're going to start with annuals, and this is just a curated selection of plants. As I said before, I'm not trying to tell you everything about weeds or herbaceous plants that you don't want, because word weed is sort of questionable. So we have lady's thumb, which is Persicaria maculosa. It's in the buckwheat family. It's the same as Japanese knotweed. It's in the same family as Japanese knotweed and smartweed. The Latin name means many knees, which refers to the swollen nodes, which you can see that connect the leaf stems. The leaves and young shoots may be eaten as a leaf vegetable, and the seeds are a very important food source for many birds and mammals. So if you want to yank this out of your garden, you might want to think a little bit about it, because they are a very important food source for pollinators. Lamb's quarter. The edge of the leaves are lanceolate. Again, if you don't know that much about morphology, I can refer you to some morphology books that are very helpful. It's alternate leaf structure, which you can see from this picture, and the leaves are covered with a white leaf mealy substance. You can also see that, especially on the undersides. The root is a branched taproot. It's edible. One of the common names is pigweed for this. I refer to it as lamb's quarters because there are many pigweeds, as you will see later. Common names and botanical names. I really prefer to use botanical names when I can, because common names are so regional, and when you're discussing it with other horticulturists, it's really can become very confusing. But I also find it fascinating to talk about common names, because they really sometimes have a lot to do with how that plant is used in commerce or in agriculture. Seeds were recovered from this plant from an archaeological site that were 1700 years old, and they've germinated. So you can tell that these plants really have developed traits that have allowed them to survive. It's used in poultry feed. I'm sure those of you who raise chickens know this. But I didn't know this, so I found this really interesting. It's used in poultry feed to produce dark yolked eggs and tender meat. This is a self-pollinated plant. So basically it's wind pollinated, or doesn't really need an actual insect or bird to pollinate it. So the next one we got going on here is pigweed. This is what I call pigweed. And the Latin name for it is Amaranthus retroflexus. There are many, many, many pigweeds. The young leaves can be eaten raw or cooked like spinach, and the leaves can be used to make tea as well. It also, I find this plant to be helpful as an indicator of leaf miner, which is an insect that creates tunnels underneath plants. So If you're concerned about leaf miner for other reasons, you can look at this plant. You can also look at columbines. Columbines trap leaf miner all the time, and they create this kind of interesting pattern underneath the leaves. This plant also shelters ground beetles, which prey upon insect pests. Ginseng weed, which is a datura. It's in the nightshade family. It is poisonous. However, it is used medicinally and ritualistically by Native Americans and also in Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. There's a really funny story about this when I was researching this presentation. There's a very famous tale that I found on the Brooklyn Botanical Garden website of the plant's accidental ingestion by British soldiers sent here to repress a rebellion in 1676. After eating some of this plant in a stew, the soldiers spent 11 days in a hallucinatory stupor, blowing feathers, kissing and pawing their companions, and making faces and quote unquote grinning like monkeys. I just thought that that was a cautionary tale about how not to use plants, not to eat plants unless you really understand what the dosage is and what is healthy and not healthy. It sounds like 11 days in a hallucinatory stupor is a little bit too long to be in that place. This plant is also fragrant at night to attract nocturnal moths. So, you know, when you see Ginseng weed and you smell it during the day, it doesn't really smell too much, but if you go at night, it has a really sweet, lovely, lovely scent to it. Purslane, I think most of us are familiar with this. It's a portulaca. It has spoon-shaped leaves, thick and fleshy. It has culinary and medicinal uses. It's high in vitamins A and C. Valued as a food by East Indians and Persians more than 2,000 years ago. I believe it was introduced here by Europeans. Ragweed. This is known as hay fever weed, and those of us who suffer from seasonal allergies are a little bit scared of this plant for a good reason. It's an ambrosia, it's very high in pollen, but its oil-rich seeds are a source of fall and winter food for birds. So if you have an area on your property or on your land that you can let this go, it's a very important pollinator plant. Chickweed, Stellarium media. It's an annual and a perennial. You get two plants for the price of one here. It is a very important food source for several North American moths and butterflies. It's edible and nutritious for humans and birds, including chickens. It can poison cattle if consumed in large quantities. So if you're doing that, you want to watch out for this plant. Very high in vitamin C. It was used to treat scurvy, and it also helps to reduce inflammation. Shepherd's purse. Again, in terms of identifying plants at different life stages, you really have to get to know the plant. There's no substitute for just being mindful and paying attention in the garden year after year after year. Every spring, I feel like I'm reinventing the wheel. I'm like, what's that plant again? You know, because it's teeny tiny and I haven't seen it like that since a year has passed. So it's really very interesting to be a gardener because everything changes all the time, right? So the first photo here shows different stages of what shepherd's purse looks like when it is in its young seedling stages. Its triangular flat fruits are purse-like shaped, which is how it got its common name, shepherd's purse. It is in the mustard family, like a lot of plants that are difficult to control. I read somewhere that it's the second most prolific plant in the world. I don't know what the source is, so I can't really speak to that, but it certainly is prolific in this part of the world. It has culinary and medicinal values. The stem rises from the crown of a taproot in the center of a Basil rosette. A single plant can produce 40,000 seeds. So, fighting the good fight against plants, when they're producing 40,000 seeds per plant is an ongoing journey that you will find in the garden. This is wild mustard. Again, the last mustard had a different botanical name, I believe. But this mustard is a synapsis, and its specific epithet is arvensis, which you will see throughout many other plants. That specific epithet refers to of the fields. That's what arvensis is derived from. And of the fields basically means that it's going to flourish under soil disturbance, and any cultivated land, there's going to be some soil disturbance involved. So that's going to encourage it to propagate. Flowers are pollinated by many types of bees, and it's also the host plant of the caterpillar of some Lepidoptera. The seeds are toxic to most animals. So if you're raising animals, you want to watch out for this. At the juvenile stage of the plant, it is edible. Okay, yellow rocket. I love this photo because of the blue sky and the yellow. Those combinations are really joyful to me. And the genus name, Barbaria, refers to the fact that this used to be the only green plant available to be gathered and eaten on St. Barbara's Day, which is December 4th. It is allegedly similar in flavor to watercress. Early colonists introduced it to North America. The large terminal lobe in the leaves will distinguish it from other mustards. And I think that large terminal lobe in the leaf is pretty obvious in this photograph. It's a winter annual or a biennial. And now we're going to move to, I did one representative biennial, because I could not in all good conscience do a presentation without talking about one of my most beloved plants, which is wild carrot or Daucus carota. It has great culinary medicinal value as a diuretic and a stimulant. The roots are edible when young. I'm sure if you've ever encountered this plant in the summertime, you've seen it being pollinated by small bees and wasps. And it makes a beautiful cut flower. It's really a very special plant. Perennials. Common milkweed, Asclepius syriaca. There are lots of different types of Asclepius. I chose this. I don't really know why I chose this one as opposed to one of the other ones. I think because I see it a lot and it's really hard to get rid of if you don't want it. It's dependent on disturbance. The glycosides protect larvae from predators. So for example, the butterflies that feed on this, and monarch are one of them, when they eat this plant, allegedly it protects the larvae from predators. Now, I have to say from my own observation, I have not necessarily found this to be true. I've seen a lot of my larvae be eaten by birds before I ever get to see them enter the next stage of development. But allegedly, that's what the plant provides for the young butterflies. It was a source of fiber used by Native Americans. We don't use it like that anymore. It would be great if we could, because it really is a very, very robust plant and very abundant. Canada thistle. Again, averence means of cultivated fields, which I was talking about earlier. So it does flourish with root disturbance. I have found that if you till every 3 weeks for an entire growing season, you can be very successful in getting rid of this plant. It is used as an herbal remedy to reduce swollen veins. So if you suffer from that, this is a plant to maybe investigate a little bit more. And then we have the dandelion, and we're gonna talk about this for a little while. Songbirds love the seeds. You know, in NOFA, you know, when I remember when I was taking my course on organic land care, we were talking about freedom lawns and how, you know, don't try to get rid of the dandelions. The dandelions are a really great thing, and you know, the flowers can be used for wine, the leaves can be used for greens. Songbirds love the seeds. What's not to love about this plant? So it got its common name dandelion from the mispronunciation of the French name Dandelion, which translates to tooth of the lion. The tooth of the lion refers to the dandelion's leaves, which are serrated and look much like teeth. The seeds are dispersed by the wind and can be carried very long distances. Each seed is attached to a bundle of many feathery bristles known as pappus, whose name derives from an ancient Greek word for grandfather due to its resemblance to a beard. They act as a parachute. And who doesn't like to take a dandelion and blow on it and make a wish? In my experience, they all come true when you do that. Oh, here we go again. Let's see if we can do it this way. Ah, there we go. Thanks for that tip, Paul. Okay, so sow thistle. All parts of this plant are edible. The leaves are rich in mineral salts and vitamin C. The roots spread horizontally. You will notice that this looks a lot of people confuse this with dandelion because the flower looks a little bit similar, but where dandelion has like a shoot one up with one flower, this has got bundles of flowers on top of it. It has spade-shaped leaves. The leaves are also different than the dandelion. So when you see this flower, don't be fooled. Dig a little deeper and you'll know that that's not a dandelion, it's a sow thistle. And you may or may not want it. Bindweed in the morning glory family, which a lot of people use as ornamentals. The Navajo use it as a medicine for spider bites and an intestinal stimulant. The roots can extend up to 9 feet. My experience with this plant is that if you keep at it, I mean, every time you dig it up, because if the roots are expanding 9 feet, there's like no way that you're going to be able to dig it up without breaking a root, and it's going to propagate by its root. And you're going to create more plants initially. But the only way to remove it is to just keep at it. I've been very successful, but it can take a few years. But keep at it and you'll be, you know, use something weed smothering, keep at it. You won't have this bindweed in your garden anymore. And the issue with bindweed is such that it strangles plant. We've all seen it. It just like it climbs up it. That's why it's called bindweed. Okay, grass. Again, I have a representative grass. Quackgrass. It's rhizotomous. It spreads quickly, up to 10 feet per year. If caught early, regular hoeing will eliminate it. I have a representative sedge, which is a cypress. Its upright growth habit is an indicator of how you can identify it. It has a prominent midrib, which I think you can see from this photo. Its underground tubers overwinter, and it's found where soil has poor drainage. So if your soil is compacted and it's not draining well, chances are you're going to see nutsedge in it. In closing, I want to say that all plants really are our brothers and sisters. They talk to us, and if we listen, we can hear them. And thank you to Arapaho, great buffalo hunters of the plains, who were, in my opinion, much better stewards of this land than we have been. So everyone, that concludes. And now we're up for the Q&A. Hoping you can all hear me.
I can hear you. I hope everyone else can.
It's so strange for me to be doing this by Zoom, but I really have to say it's a whole other energy, and it's a whole other way of doing it. I'm glad we have the technology, but I really, really, really miss live in-person seminars. So any questions for me on any of this? Comments, concerns, or do we want to start with reviewing the weed quiz?
So far, the one question that I saw in the chat was about a technique called Mirimichi, which I don't know if you have used Mirimichi before. M-I-R, yep, there it is from Kim.
Talk to me, I want to know about it.
Yes, Kim, you are welcome to unmute yourself if you'd like and ask any of your questions.
And I'll just jump in real quick. Roberta, if you want to stop sharing your screen, then we can go back to people's faces.
I would like that. Yay, hi everyone.
Great.
Hi everyone.
Hi Kim.
Hi. So I work for a landscaping company. I'm an account manager, and we have started sort of moving away from vinegar solution.
Yep.
Onto Mirimichi. Have you had any luck with it?
I don't know about it. Tell me about it. I want to know.
It's basically, I think, a fatty acid. It is organic. We're having trouble with it staining some of the hardscaping. I don't know if anybody might have used it in any capacity that could help with that.
Well, I'll tell you, now that you've told me about it, I will definitely check it out, and I'd be happy to report back to you my experience. But thank you for telling me about staining of the hardscaping, because that is a scary thing.
It's only happened on one property so far, but it does seem to be very effective.
Excellent, thank you.
It's pretty exciting. That nobody else here has used it at all?
Oh, what are you using it on?
Weeds in beds, weeds in hardscapes.
So is it effective on perennial and annual weeds, or just?
It seems to be. It seems to knock things out pretty well. The only thing, I was doing a trial with Agipodium, because that is so brutal to get rid of.
Yep.
And we'll see. We'll see as we move into the season, I think.
Well, I have some problems with goutweed, right? Agipodium.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with that. So I will definitely trial it, and it's not even in an area where that. So thank you for that, Kim.
Sure, it is on the pricier side.
Well, I'll just pass that cost on to my clients who have.
There you go. That's what we do.
And that's one of the reasons I love doing these things, because I learn from you guys too. So, jump on in, everybody.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you.
All right, wonderful. So here's another question, and it's about somebody I've actually personally worked with when I was the operations manager at Grace Farms in New Canaan. So this is from Elizabeth. It says, I've learned from Larry Wiener's course that the best way to manage all weeds is not to pull, is that disseminates a dormant weed bed and generates even more weeds. Elizabeth?
And that's correct. And thank you for that, Elizabeth, because that's actually going to be helpful to me. I'll modify this to include that. So Larry Wiener's applications, in my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, are mostly like large meadows, so I'm coming from the experience of a landscape gardener, and I'm not talking specifically about like acres of land. I'm talking about smaller applications, and I absolutely agree when you're using manual removal for weeds, as I was discussing earlier when we were talking about bindweed. You're definitely going to be propagating more plants, and it's going to be more of a problem in the beginning. But if you keep at it over the course of a couple of years, but if the application is really large, no. And actually, Larry uses Roundup, I understand, which I know is in large applications. Sometimes that's what you have to do. I'm pretty sure Penn Marshall does as well. So, but yes, the best way to manage, I would say, some weeds is not to pull, and it will disseminate a dormant weed bed and generate even more weeds in the short term. Absolutely. So Elizabeth, if you want to add or subtract anything from that, jump in.
All right, Roberta, we have a question from Jose. Jose, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Hi there. This question might be a little meta, but we do these like native land acknowledgements and try to acknowledge by POC ways, and then we jump right into colonist language so quickly. I don't know how many ways I heard you use control or smother or beat back, which really actually like hit me when you talked about beating back the plants as you were managing one of those gardens. And I just wonder, with your colonized school background and the colonized aesthetic that you cater to and that pays your livelihood, how do you break free of the colonizer mindset? I think this is why in the origins of permaculture, they were so against aesthetic, and they really, you could never be a permaculturalist. And I don't think you really can be if what you do is designed for aesthetic. And I know some elements of permaculture are allowing more aesthetic in, but I think that hard line against aesthetic was there for a reason. So how do you balance as a colonizer on colonized land, trained in colonized horticulture, trying to be respectful, and why not just drop the aesthetic and stop doing aesthetics?
So what I hear you saying, Jose, is that the language of colonization and the way that land is managed as colonizers is something that it would benefit us all to move away from. Is that what I'm hearing? And that's some of the language I was using.
Or just some of those sites you were showing don't want to be meadow. They want to be woodland, and they were woodland for thousands of years. And we came in with an idea of, you know, that we still have, that our lawn is our freedom and our lawn is our property, and our lawn shows the demarcation of how much control we have over the land. And you're working in and around lawns, and they want to go back to woodland. And so all the control and all the fighting is because you're trying to create meadows where meadows don't belong.
Absolutely. And so, and I hear you on that. And it is very meta, as you said, and it is a huge question, and it's a huge inquiry, and it's not something that I can really speak to in any depth right now. But I really appreciate you bringing it up. I would want to add two quick things, is that a lot of the BIPOC people that I've been following in horticulture are not really fully supportive of permaculture, because permaculture was, I believe, and you'll all correct me if I'm wrong, was invented in Australia, I think, and then it came here. I mean, that's also a construct. Permaculture itself is a construct. So where
as is the language we're using, right? But to identify permaculture as a construct and not English as a construct misses the point of the constructs we're in. Zoom is a construct.
I agree. It's a very big topic. I do want to say one quick thing. I am a really huge fan of two books. One is by Fred Pierce called The New Wild. And if anyone has read that or knows about it, I would highly recommend it because it speaks to the whole native plant issue, I think, in a way that not all of us have been exposed to. And then there's another book. I'm in my office right now. I'm looking for it like really quickly by who wrote Gaia's Garden? Is it Gaia's Garden? It's one of the permaculture books. She's kind of known as the queen of permaculture. I can't find it right now, but I'm going to find it and I'll send it on. But it opens Gaia. Okay, yeah. So in any case, it's I'll find the book, but it also opens up the conversation about native plants and where we go with that. So if you haven't read either of those books, I would highly recommend them. But thank you, Jose. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Jose, for your question. Next up, we have Bruce. Bruce, you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Hi, Brucey Moulton. And I just wanted to make a comment about the plant traits and pollinators table that you showed earlier. And I noticed on the pollinators that you didn't include wasps, but later when you were talking about Queen Anne's lace, you mentioned that they often appear there. They also love my goldenrod.
Oh, yes.
So I was wondering how you happen to leave off the many wasps that are pollinators.
On that plant chart, you know, maybe just an oversight, and maybe moving forward, I'll add that on, because wasps are very important pollinators. You know, it's funny, people never mention bats either, you know, and, you know, they kind of want to talk about butterflies and bees. And, you know, listen, I love the butterflies and the bees, but, you know, not everybody wants to talk about bats and wasps. But thank you, Brucey.
And as a follow-up, are there, I know about bats being pollinators, but do we have plants here in New England that the bats are pollinating?
You know, obviously I know about agave. You know, I know that they pollinate agave, and to my knowledge, I don't know of any plants in New England that are actually pollinating.
Mm-hmm.
I could dig a little deeper on that, I think.
We'll think about agave in the meantime.
Yeah, right, exactly. And tequila.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Brucey. We appreciate it. We're having a good spirited debate about permaculture.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at some of this. This is really, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, it's about standing in the inquiry for me anyway, you know, and learning and being open and listening, you know, because really these are conversations that people have not been having. And some of these conversations are difficult, but to be present to them, I think, is how we're all going to grow and how we're all going to learn. I wish I could find that other book I was trying to talk about. I'm going to leave the screen for a minute. Oh.
Anyone else? Any questions in the chat? You can type something in the chat for us. You can raise
Ashley, I'll just let people know that I went ahead and put the link to the evaluation for the workshop. So please feel free to click on that link in the chat and give us feedback about, you know, this presentation, as well as, you know, the earlier ones, the next ones, presentations all weekend long. So please give us feedback. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, I would love feedback too. You know, it doesn't have to be positive. It can be negative. I'm trying to learn. It's by Tal O'Ryan, and it's called Beyond the War on Invasive Species. So sorry, I don't have a blue screen, so it's not coming up very good here. But it's Tal O'Ryan, Beyond the War on Invasive Species, which is a permaculture approach to ecosystem restoration. So if you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend it. And the book, The New Wild, is by Fred Pierce, I believe, who's an ecological journalist, P-E-A-R-C-E, I think.
I've actually posted a link.
Oh, you're awesome, Ashley.
Good reads for The New Wild for you, right up for everyone up there.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to everybody. I mean, this has been really informative and helpful to me. And I hope, we didn't review the weeds game, right? You guys up for that? Do we have time? Yeah? Okay.
You actually have another half hour.
Oh my God, are you serious? I must have blasted through that. I was so worried about time because I was having that problem with the cursor movement that I just blasted through it. Okay, so the weed game, everybody. Do we want to do raising hands or something, and then people can identify from left to right? How does that sound, Paul and Ashley?
If you can, people can enter it in the chat. Since a lot of people don't have their screens on, they can also raise their hands, but the chat box is a great way to do that.
All right, so let's try the chat, okay? All right, first one is the first weed on the top left, okay? Anybody want to throw that into the chat for identification? Sounds like people are much more interested in talking about permaculture than weed identification right now.
Is there something we're supposed to see?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought I said that in the very beginning. In the very beginning of the chat, there is a JPEG. So we have photos of several plants here. So we have a multiple choice quiz here. The top left, does anyone want to give me a guess on that? What plant that might be?
Dandelion. Oh, I'm unmuted.
I can't see anything except my screen right now. So Ashley and Paul, you're gonna have to help.
Yeah. I'm waiting for people to.
Okay, sorry.
Somebody wrote something, but it's missing a vowel, maybe Nutsedge.
Okay, the top left. It's a Basil Rosette. Does anyone recognize that plant?
Somebody wrote Rosette of Shepherd's Purse.
That is indeed shepherd's purse. Bing, bing, bing. On the top, we're going to go from left to right. So the next plant on the right, next to the shepherd's purse, would be.
All right, somebody wrote Chickweed.
Excellent. Now we're going to go to the second row. We're going to go from left to right. On the left, that would be
Priscilla wrote quackgrass.
Yep. You guys were either have a ton of knowledge or were paying a lot of attention, probably both. On the second row on the right, that plant is.
Brucey was right on it. Correct. Purslane.
Yep. And now we have the third row on the left. There are lots of these. There's a common name of this plant that refers to a bunch of different plants. This is one of them.
Brucey wrote delicious lamb's quarters, and Priscilla wrote pigweed.
Pigweed. It's an amaranth pigweed, as a matter of fact. I just thought it would be kind of fun to use the common names because I'm not as good at them. So I'm trying to learn them more. Okay, third row on the right. That would be.
Yes, Priscilla wrote Nutsedge.
Correct. That is Nutsedge. Really easy to identify with that prominent midrib and those unusual type flowers, and it has an underground tuber and yeah, and as I said earlier, an indicator of bad drainage in your soil or poor drainage in your soil. Now we're down to the last row on the left. We have, okay, if you've been crossing off the plants, we already found out on the very top, you're going to be able to see
lamb's quarters.
That is indeed lamb's quarters. And it's funny because at different times of year, it's got that little red coloration in the tips of the plants. And then the last one on the bottom right, it's in the morning glory family, and it's the last one.
Marion said bindweed.
Yes, very well. Very, very good. Yeah, I just kind of thought it was sort of fun to play around with our knowledge and all of that. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. There we go. I'm back. Thanks for playing the weed game. Thanks for being here. Thanks for all your really good questions. I'm going to go through this. I think that there's it's funny that nobody saw that in the oh, it did default. You were right, Jose, or whoever it was who told me that. That's why it wasn't showing up. somehow it defaulted the chat to one person. I don't know why. Someone might have sent me a private message. But that's it. If someone has anything really compelling and wants to raise their hand, you know, we have a little bit more time here.
We have a thank you. If there are no further questions from anyone, I'm happy to wrap up. Just a couple of things before you leave. We would really, really appreciate your feedback on this workshop and the others you attend. Paul's going to post a little link in the chat right here for you. It's just a brief survey. You can link to that and fill it out before you go to lunch. The interactive attendee program book will also be ready for you today and tomorrow. The links are interactive, and you can find your next meeting link through what we're going to post in the chat in a moment. Please again visit our vendor marketplace to find generous discount codes and valuable information from our 20+ vendors. You'll see some old conference favorites as well as new shops to browse. And we have some really incredible items to bid on in the online auction. So that link will be available for you as well. Again, attendance at the NOFA Mass Winter Conference actually fulfills all 4 continuing education hours for AOLCPs. So please keep a record of your attendance. And at the next reaccreditation cycle, for the next reaccreditation cycle. And if you have any questions or comments, I will post my email address. And Roberta, would you like me to make your email address available to folks?
Absolutely. And I'm just scanning through this right now, and I want to say a special thank you to Russ. I mean, there's a lot of information here that's really helpful. I appreciate that. And some of the comments that you made, I absolutely am aware of. Some of them I'm not. I kind of had to sort of crunch some things in for time reasons, but really I appreciate all of the comments and the active participation in this. It's really awesome. And I think I should be able to print this out or save the chat. Is that correct, Ashley and Paul?
Yep, I'm going to make sure that you can print this out. I'll also save it as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
Thank you,
Roberta.
everyone.
Bye.